as for the hostages, I think it was clear from very early on. The hostages were a boon to the Israeli war effort, right? They were good to kind of present to the international community, to the world. This is what our war is about recovering our hostages. We know now that on day 2, day 3, the families of the hostages themselves have come out and said this, that Hamas offered to return most of the hostages if Israel did not, enter Gaza militarily and then conduct a prisoner swap for the remaining hostages who were taken. Israel chose not to do that, not to take up that offer. And what has happened is that the only time we've seen a mass release of Israeli captives was during the 1 week ceasefire in November. And ever since then, we've seen more hostages killed, either by their captors or by Israeli bombardment.
So if that's what we're left with, and as you alluded to, the copious amounts of reporting, specifically in the Israeli press, about how the negotiations for the return of hostages have been sabotaged at basically every single juncture by Netanyahu's government, because
by Netanyahu specifically.
By him specifically, because if they were to be returned, then the stated reason for this war would be off the table. And then, it's very clear for his internal political reasons, and again, we know the internal political reasons about why he wants to keep this war going, to stay out of jail, to stay in power, etc. But does that capture the whole picture of this policy here, of extermination, essentially?
No, I think it gives the Israeli public a little too much credit. I think this war is very, very popular with the Israeli public, and even though you'll see reports about massive protests in Tel Aviv every now and then by people who want a ceasefire deal, the war itself and the destruction of Gaza have shown in poll after poll to be extremely popular. The dehumanization, the torture of Palestinians, the mass killing. Very, very popular. And so it's not just that if the war ends that Netanyahu will be on his way out. By the way, polls also show that Netanyahu has now become the most popular political figure in Israel a year on. So he kind of managed to weather the initial storm of criticism that he faced in the aftermath of October 7th and is once again the most popular politician in Israel. So even those factors are kind of losing their importance. I think the war has become what's the word? The war has become self-sustaining, right? The reason we're at war is because there is a war. That's essentially how it's being framed. And so, going back to the hostages more than anything have become a nuisance to Netanyahu and to the Israeli government. They're a cudgel with which his opponents, his domestic opponents, can attack him with. But he'd much rather just focus on fighting Gaza and expanding this war to Lebanon.
As it stands right now, what would be what are the conditions by which the leadership of Hamas have laid out for a ceasefire deal that they would accept, in terms of what are the conditions that need to be met for that they say that they will return at least the civilian hostages?
They want what Joe Biden wants, apparently. Joe Biden put out a ceasefire proposal, and they've repeatedly said, we will adhere to President Biden's proposal. Ironically, as you guys know, Biden presented that as Netanyahu's proposal instead of his own, and then Netanyahu just shat all over it. The conditions that Hamas have laid out are, or the overall parameters of that are that there would be obviously cessation of fighting. The Israelis would withdraw from Gaza, from the places where they are currently located. There would be a prisoner exchange over several stages, and that there would be an official end to the war, and Gaza would be, as U.S. officials like to say, flooded with aid. So that's the proposal. It's been pretty consistent from last year till now, and it hasn't really changed. And it matches what the U.S. has said would be their vision for a ceasefire.